What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So today's video, we're back working on the new mini quad project that has a 6.5 horsepower swapped into it with a torque converter and all that. And I think it's been like a week or two since I've even worked on this thing, just because I've been trying to finish up a bunch of other projects, and at the same time I just been kind of wanting to sleep on the idea of how to actually mount up the motor in this thing. If you saw the first video on this thing where I actually ended up stripping this thing basically down to a complete frame, getting all the unnecessary stuff off of there, and then we actually started mocking up the 6.5 horsepower motor in there with the engine plate and all that, you would know that this thing has been the tightest frame I had to actually fit a 6.5 horsepower in. You can see just sitting in here, the head is basically past the frame over here and is almost touching up here. And just the way it sits right now with the chain almost lined up, the two bolt holes on this right side of the motor are literally sitting right above the frame. So before I ended up actually welding in some studs or welding in the engine plate and all that, I wanted to try to sleep on the idea before I ended up kind of screwing myself, because getting this motor in and out is not too fun. And last thing I need is this motor not to go in anymore or to get stuck inside the frame and all that. So I think I kind of got a good idea on what I want to do with this setup and to actually get the motor mounted up in it. But I want to try a few things and kind of just look at a few things before I actually get the motor 100% in there. So really, the biggest thing I would love to is actually redo half of this frame. It's kind of this whole top section here, because you can see how hard this kind of slants down compared to the orange frame over here, where it kind of has a little straight section and then kicks down. Just because this whole slant section has been kind of screwing my whole setup with the exhaust, intake, and just kind of getting clearance on the back of the motor here. So I would really love to replace this whole top end and kind of just straighten it all out and add a couple bars down, especially with the seats area right here. You can kind of see how it would be slanted down. Really not too comfortable, but I don't want to do all that since I kind of have a timeline on this thing, which is really Christmas, because kind of planning on to be a Christmas present for my brother's kids and all that. So I kind of just want to get this thing knocked out as much as possible and kind of keep it in the same setup it is already. So before I end up actually doing all that, I want to try a few things by actually adding a new rear sprocket on the back here, which I got sitting on the table. Actually a 420 chain sprocket, because I think the one on here is like a T58, which is some like weird kind of 110 quad setup. So get an actual 420 chain sprocket on the back here, so then we can actually start lining up the torque converter 100%, seeing what the engine's actually going to lie. And then I think I'm going to start welding in some studs on the engine plate itself, just enough where the engine can actually go on there and have a nut on top bolted down and still have enough room for us to lift it off and still get the engine to snake out of there. So that's kind of the whole plan. So actually I'm going to start off by pulling apart the rear end here, getting the new sprocket on there so we can start lining up the torque converter. And then the next thing is actually seeing how the clearance is on the main driver here, because just throwing it on here pretty quick, it is real close to everything all on the bottom around this kind of whole foot peg. I can tell already that the cover for the torque converter is definitely going to be fun to trim up and actually get it to fit with everything on there with the foot pegs and all that. But I really do want to put it on there just because this thing's going to be around kids, and it will actually straighten out the motor in the frame and kind of make it look center and correct in here. So enough talking, I guess let's get to work. Start by pulling this whole rear end apart. Really just got to pull off the axle wheel hub, and then I can kind of just pull this sprocket right off since it's kind of bolted on the left side here. And let's get the new sprocket put on there so we can start lining everything all up and seeing how we can get the engine actually in its final spot. You guys might have noticed from the time lapse, I kind of ended up wasting my time pulling off the stock sprocket here, because the one I ended up ordering is ended up being too big. These bolt holes were just a little too wide, and instead of drilling these out, I'm just gonna end up ordering one that actually fits for this thing. So in the meantime, we'll end up actually lining up the engine to this stock sprocket, because it should pretty much be super close to where we need to. In worst case, we can always have a little bit of adjustment in the motor bolts to actually get it 100% in line. But you might also notice me put on the driver here, and it did end up clearing, but it literally has like an 1/8 of an inch of clearance. It's super hard to tell there, but it is really close to the frame, and I know this thing does expand and contract when it's actually in its motion. So I think I'm gonna end up actually putting a couple washers underneath the bottom of the back of the motor, just to kind of lift it up a little bit, give me a little bit more clearance for this rear driver, and not have any issues with it actually contacting the frame at all. But the more I'm looking at this thing and just kind of figuring out the idea for where the motor is actually going to mount on it, I did notice that already the engine plate is sitting on this kind of foot peg section. You might notice I did take off the whole foot peg section off camera, just to kind of make it a little bit easier and kind of give me a little bit easier look in here and see what's actually hitting. But the engine plate is actually sitting right on top of there, which is actually kind of causing it to lean to the left side a little bit. So I do need to chop down the engine plate a little bit more to actually get it to sit level in there. And then I'm more thinking about this thing, and I think it's just probably more worth my time just to end up actually chopping the frame up just a little bit and just make it fit the engine and actually fit the whole vibe of this thing. I think it will make the frame actually look a little bit better in the end by actually chopping out this section here from right down here, and probably up at this bar, and then right at this bar where the spring actually mounts to, and kind of delete this whole center section here and kind of just straighten it out right to this bar. So then the seat will sit flat right up on here. We can have the gas tank sit up here, and then probably add another bar from down here up to it. Give us a little bit more clearance for the exhaust, intake, and the spark plug and all that, and also just a lot more clearance for the engine itself. So that's kind of what I'm more leaning towards at this point, but I'm really not too sure. I really just want to get the engine plate chopped up and get the engine actually sitting in place where it should be, and then kind of go from there. But I'm kind of more leaning towards actually chopping up the frame, just because it'll make this whole project a lot more easier, and I think personally it'll look a lot better in the end. So I guess let's get to work chopping down the engine plate a little bit and get the engine set up in place, and then kind of just figure it out from there. And worst case, tomorrow we'll just end up chopping up some metal and welding it up all up in here and getting this thing all fitted up a lot better than it is now, and just kind of see what it looks like, or just kind of go from there. The next day, last night, I ended up chopping this good 1.5 inches off the engine plate and got the engine to actually sit flat inside the frame. And the more I've been sitting here looking at this thing, I kind of just decided that I'm going to end up chopping the frame on this thing. So I ended up waiting until today, picking up some metal for this thing so we can actually get this thing all finished up. So just chopping the frame on this thing just make it a lot easier, give me a lot more space around the engine for the intake and exhaust, torque converter as well, so we can actually run the cover on this thing, and then it'll actually let me run bolts and nuts on the motor through the engine plate without having to do any like kind of weird stud thing with having the motor being able to come out still and all that. So I think in the end it'll just make it a lot more easier, and it's still, I think it'll probably actually make the frame look a lot better in the end too, because I really don't like the way that the seat kind of comes down here and then kind of kicks back up. So my idea here, you can see with the level, I'm thinking about bringing the bar all the way back. So my idea is to chop frame right here at the swing arm, and then right here at this flat section right there, and then right back here, right where the top shock mount is, and then end up putting a pipe slipped over this kind of whole 6-inch section here, bring it all the way straight on back, right where it meets up with the shock mount, so that'll strengthen that whole section up, and then the triangulate it all and kind of strengthen it a little bit more, bringing some more strength down here to the swing arm, adding a pipe from down here, going pretty much almost straight up, but kind of have a little bit more of a kick to it, just to kind of give us a little bit more clearance around the engine and stuff, and then it'll at least strengthen up under the seat and all that. So in the end, it'll at least give us a lot more clearance on the top of the engine. And then my idea for the engine itself is to actually add some like inch square tubing underneath the engine plate, weld that to the frame, and then weld the engine plate to the square tubing on top, which will let us have room for the bolts underneath and kind of clear up from there. I did end up buying inch square tubing and 3/4 square tubing, just because I wasn't sure what would actually work a little bit better. And I think the inch might be just the best way I can go, because I can run some nice longer bolts through it. but if anything, we can run the 3/4 if we have any clearance problems from the top down. But I'm gonna start off actually chopping up the frame since I got all the tubing here that I'm gonna need. So I ended up getting some nice inch tubing, got some inch square tubing and some 3/4 square tubing. So the inch square tubing is gonna be on the top section here, going all the way back, and then we're gonna use it for these little top supports as well. I do have a little stick around here somewhere, gonna find, but there's like an extra from another project that we're gonna use as well. That'll at least finish off this top, and then we'll have a nice flat seat up here. And I'm thinking maybe running a gas tank like my orange quad over here, just right above the frame, kind of just sitting right up there. So it'll kind of make this all flat, and we'll still have this little kick up to the back of the frame, which will still make it look pretty nice. So that's kind of the whole idea. So enough talking, I guess let's just get to work. Probably set you guys up on a time lapse and just start chopping away at this thing, get her all chopped out, and start chopping up some new tubing, notching it all up, and getting it welded up onto the frame. Might have been kind of hard to tell in the time lapse there, but I was just sitting here fighting all my grinder batteries being dead and literally getting like 2 or 3 minutes of grinding done and then having to swap it out, and they're just still being a pain charging up and all that. So I got to a point where I kind of just got the pipes in and tacked them up, and at that point just called the time lapse and finished up welding the bars in completely. So they are 100% in there and strong, and I'm really liking how the frame's looking at this point. Now you can actually see kind of my whole idea with this thing. We do still need to add in a couple support bars from down here going up, but my whole idea is to at least get the engine kind of in place where it's going to need to be. So I'm planning on chopping up some of this square tubing that I have here and get my little supports in for underneath the engine plate. So I'm gonna have a couple pieces of square tubing right above these bars welded in, engine plate right on top so the engine can sit up. It'll give me a lot more clearance down here with the torque converter and all that, and at the same time just kind of give me a lot more clearance actually bolting the thing in. And then once we actually figure out where the engine's gonna go, I want to start getting these bars in line so we can strengthen this whole frame back up, because I know once I chop this whole thing out, it definitely moved a little bit, but it is what it is. If the more I actually look at this frame, this whole frame is kind of off, and every kind of pipe is just slightly tweaked. So it kind of just seems like these things are just pretty much slapped together, and as long as they're pretty much kind of square, they work. So really, me being off a little bit ain't really gonna hurt this thing at all. So I guess at this point, I'm gonna start cutting up some square tubing, get it popped up in there. I don't think I'm gonna end up welding all that in tonight, but at least get it all mocked up in place so tomorrow we can come back, get it all welded up, and start actually getting the motor 100% bolted up inside the frame. What's up, guys? So it's actually the next day again. Last night I ended up chopping out the little square tubing for underneath the motor here. You can see I got them in place, got the motor in line and kind of where it's at. And the more I've been sitting here looking at this thing, I kind of just want to spend a little bit more time on the square tubing and actually make it look kind of factory, or more like actually fit this whole style. So you can see I kind of just cut it short right before these foot pegs here, and then I just kind of chopped it off right here. So instead of having like a cap right here and a cap right here, and it kind of not really fitting this whole thing. It's kind of hard to show you, but you can see this whole little gap here. I want to extend this back tube all the way to this foot peg section, cut out this whole little angle right there on the tube, and actually weld it in so it looks like one flat tube going all the way across. And that's the same for both sides there. And for the front, you can see I have a little bit of overhang from the engine plate here, so I want to maybe chop this down and have it come down like a triangle so it kind of caps itself off and don't have to add a little cap on there and can weld straight to it, and it'll look a little bit better. And then I'm thinking about adding another square tube on the back, from the back of the engine plate, going back right above before the swing arm there, right where this factory engine mount used to be. So we're gonna have to get that chopped out of there and get it out of the way, and then we gotta start laying some tubes in. So I think I'm just gonna end up knocking these all out real quick before I even weld them in. I'll show you guys so you guys have a better idea of actually what I'm talking about. Then we can get the engine actually welded in, get the engine plate welded in finally, and motor bolted in when it's final position. Luckily now we actually have a little bit of adjustment forward and back. I think about like an inch of adjustment forward and back, so if we need to, we have it. And at the end we can actually get the main tube for the supports going to these top bars here from down here in place where we're actually going to need to. I'm going to have to snag an exhaust off one of my mini bikes or the ATV to actually test fit in here and make sure everything's actually going to fit. But then we can actually get this whole frame. All right, so it's been a couple hours. As you can tell, it is now pitch black outside. This is my first time actually notching some tubing, really square tubing. It's my first, really. But got my couple pieces made up for underneath the engine here, and I ended up whipping up 3 pieces here. I welded these 2 together already, so we got the one here for the front. I ended up capping off that end and then capping off the end here. That's actually gonna sit on the front side of the frame, just about probably right around there. And then we got this big T section here that's actually gonna sit right in between the foot pegs right here. And then we got this back section coming across to the old kind of engine mount that used to be here. I ended up chopping out, and this will actually support a lot of the back weight too. I'm maybe considering adding another bar in between these two, but I can always do that later once we actually get the engine plate on there. But now that we have the engine plate and got these square tubings all notched up, this is about where the engine plate's gonna be. And if I can get this all lined up in one hand, you can kind of see how it's all going to sit. So luckily someone already drilled a hole in this engine plate to, I guess, mount it up somehow, so I can end up actually plug welding the engine plate right here to this front bar. And you can kind of see how I have it sloping right up to the engine plate. I can weld it right up there, weld it underneath here, and then weld this square tubing straight to the frame. And same goes for the back here, all around wherever the metal's actually touching. I'm gonna get it welded up. But the one thing is, I noticed a lot of my sanding wheels are pretty trash, so I'm gonna try and do my best and see how much I can actually get welded up tonight. I want to get a lot of this square tubing welded up now before I actually get the engine plate on there, because once I get the engine plate on there, it's not going to be too fun getting in some of these tight spots. So I want to get a lot of this welded up now, and then eventually, once it's all welded up, we can slap the engine plate on there, get the engine all lined up, and actually get the engine plate tacked in with it in its final position. And then we can start finishing up the final last couple bars to actually strengthen up this whole frame here. But she's looking good. I'm stoked about how it's coming out. So enough talking, back to work. Let's get these couple square tubings welded in, and let's see how she's looking. I'm sorry if this video is a little all over the place. I really haven't been filming that much, just trying to get this all knocked out, and it's been taking a little bit longer than I thought. So last night I ended up starting to weld in most of the square tubing. Once I got it all tacked in and actually went to start laying some beads, I ended up running out of some welding wire. So today ran to the store, picked up some welding wire, and ended up just finishing this thing up. So I got all the square tubing welded in as much as possible, really as much as I can without the engine plate on there, because I won't really be able to get to some of these parts. But once I got that all welded in, I got the engine plate in line and got that all welded in as well. So now we can officially get the motor mocked up in its official spot, and then we can start seeing on how a couple things are gonna fit. My plan is to steal the center exit exhaust off my little mini bike right here, just to mock up with the engine in here, just so we can start figuring out where these main support tubes are actually going to go, because I wanted to actually clear the exhaust and intake. The intake should be fine, but the exhaust is really my main worry here. So I'm going to end up tossing the motor in, getting that all mocked up with the center exit exhaust, and I'll start chopping up some tubing here, and then we can get these main supports in, and finally finishing up modifying this whole frame and getting this thing all strengthened back up. So I just got the engine mocked up inside the frame here, and then I got the center exhaust kind of in place where it's going to be. It is hitting the spring right here, so we will have to kind of modify it later to kind of just straighten it past the spring there and actually be able to put the muffler on. But it is no big deal, as kind of shows us where this main section right here is and kind of loops back. So now we can actually get our main pipe here and start laying out where I'm thinking. I want to have a decent angle on this thing because I want it to actually look like an ATV. So I'm thinking more something like right around here probably looks the best, and it'll at least kind of help strengthen the middle of this main bar right here. So I'm going to start chopping up some of this pipe and actually getting it notched up, ready to weld in here. I might even tack it up in the meantime just to kind of get it out of the way, and then I'll kind of catch up with you guys once I get the main idea all knocked out. And if you guys are questioning, I am going to end up plating the main tubes that go up here back down to the swing arm plate right here, so it'll strengthen this all back up and actually bring some strength back into the swing arm mount there. So let's get to work. Enough talking, because we ain't got much time tonight, and today's the last day I can really work on this thing and edit this tonight and get it up for you guys tomorrow. So enough talking, let's get to work and let's get this frame all finished up. So about another hour later of cutting, grinding, and welding in a couple bars, I finally finished up the back two supports on the frame here and pretty much got all the frame modifications done that we needed to. So I lined them up best I could. From looking at the side here, you can mainly see just that one there, and then if you look a little bit more, you can see the second one hiding behind there, and they are looking good, and it definitely strengthened up the frame a ton just bouncing on it. You can tell nothing's really flexing here, but I am thinking about maybe adding in another bar in between these two, but I already know I'm going to end up adding a couple flat plates like this for the seat and the gas tank to mount onto, because they're going to need a nice flat surface. But now that we got these two bars in and she's actually looking like an ATV frame again, we can finally get the motor popped up in there and see how it's going to look with these bars in there. And I'm stoked with how this thing's coming together so far. So let's get that motor tossed up in there and we can see how she looks and basically wrap up this video from here. And just like that, we got the engine plopped up in there, and I even threw on the other side step just to kind of get a good idea of actually how this thing's going to look. But she's looking good, and I'm stoked how this thing's coming along. Really, at this point now, it's all the small little stuff like intake, exhaust, throttle, and brakes, and then doing the chain and finishing up all the torque converter stuff, which is really not too hard. So really, I think if we can order up all the parts for this thing, we can probably get this thing finished up in next video, if not the next video after that, working on this thing. So do expect in the next at least 2 videos that this thing should be running and driving. So put that on me if I don't. But other than that, I'm stoked that this thing's coming along. I'm pretty sad how pretty chopped up this video is, because it's over the course of like 4 or 5 days, and it's just little issues running in here and there, and then just time of cutting and welding pipe takes a little bit of time, and not being able to actually film it, or even filming it on the side takes a little bit of time on top of everything. But we got her done, so that's all I'm happy about. So that was kind of my main goal, is at least get all the modifications done to this frame. So at this point, we can kind of just get all the little small stuff knocked out on this thing. But she's looking good, and I'm happy with how it's coming together. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, hope you like, comment, subscribe. Stay tuned for more content, and peace out. And if you have any ideas on a name for this thing, please let me know, because I would love to. But peace out.